Salt wind pushed through the steel catwalks and carried the taste of the ocean across the training pit. Heat rose off the vinyl mat until the air felt tight and close. Around the perimeter, 301 Navy SEALs stood shoulder to shoulder, boots planted, eyes fixed on the center. No one spoke. Everyone waited. The first sound cut through like a dry branch breaking. The second landed heavier, closer, and the mat trembled in a small circle. Then the world held its breath. The line of operators did not shift an inch. You could hear the hiss of the wind and the distant crush of waves against concrete. You could see sunlight sliding across wet steel and the faint scuff marks where soles had turned. The mat looked almost calm, but every chest in the ring paused between breaths. The silence felt heavy and exact. No one reached for anything. The training area allowed no weapons, no plate carriers, only gloves and discipline. Faces were still. A few jaws clenched. The air smelled like salt and rubber. Hold this picture for a beat. If this moment grips you, tap like, hit subscribe, and keep the bell on so you do not miss what comes next. We will move only when the rules say move. We will speak only when the lessons are clear. The ocean kept pounding the seawall far beyond the chain link. The light flickered off the catwalk, and the ring tightened by instinct. Crack, snap, silence. Triton sat on a rocky finger of coast, a steel and concrete maze that faced the open water. Salt wind moved through grated walkways and left a film on rails and bolts. The training pit was a rectangle of vinyl and rubber with scuffed edges and painted bounds. Far out, waves hit the seawall in a steady thud that never quite stopped. This cycle was the restricted space survival readiness evaluation. It measured how instructors and role players handled entanglement and flooded compartments with controlled speed and no competitive force. Impact trauma was not allowed. The goal was clean technique and safe release under pressure. Safety wrapped the space like a net. The mat area allowed no weapons and no plate carriers, only gloves and inspection of gear. Hospital corpsmen waited at the edge with a litter and a stocked trauma kit. A safety officer tracked distance and posture. Crowd control was simple and firm. A mesh barrier kept the line of Navy SEALs a step off the vinyl. Markers on the deck showed lanes for movement and a clear route for medics if the exercise stopped. Command and medical roles were clear. Commander Andrew Pike held start, stop, and freeze, and his word stood. Hospital corpsmen owned treatment. Range staff owned the mat and the clock. The audience looked large because multiple platoons cycled in by block. Trainees rotated through the same window to observe the same demonstration. Bodies shifted in and out with precision so the head count stayed high without packing the rails. You could feel order in the way boots lined along the boundary. You could see it in the quick hand checks and nods before anyone stepped forward. The wind carried salt into every breath. The mat shimmered with heat and use. This was not a show. It was a disciplined evaluation with real rules and real oversight. It set the table for what would follow without saying how it would end. The crowd held a quiet that felt intentional. You could hear small sounds the ocean made against concrete and steel. You could see shoulders square up and then go perfectly still. Most had watched this evaluation in other forms. Breach and clear, inside a smoke-charged room with controlled movement. Vertical evacuation, up a ladder, well, with vision limited to a few feet. They had seen mass casualty triage on a cold deck with moulage and timers. They had seen instructors run drills that looked simple and felt brutal only because of the clock. This felt different before it even started. The rules were printed and briefed. Controlled speed demonstration. No competitive force and no impact trauma. On the mat, there were no weapons and no plate carriers. Only gloves and checked gear. Nothing sharp or rigid crossed the boundary line. Hospital corpsmen waited at the edge with a litter, airway kit, and splints. They stood near a clear lane taped for rapid access. A safety officer kept eyes on spacing and posture. Commander Andrew Pike owned the rhythm of the space. He would call, begin, stop, or freeze, and everyone understood that chain. The ring took its cues from his stance even before the first word. The Navy SEALs formed a shallow arc around the vinyl. Some leaned on their knees. Others sat low with elbows on thighs and palms open. Faces were calm and focused. The habit of scanning never really stopped. Even in training, boots edged the line in a neat row that looked measured. People knew this was not a show for visitors. This was the restricted space survival readiness evaluation, and the point was discipline, control, and clean problem-solving under watch. No one wanted drama. You could feel that shared purpose in the way chatter died early. You could see it in how quickly a stray hand came off a rail. Even the wind felt like part of the routine. The mat showed scuffs from earlier rotations. Multiple platoons and trainees had cycled through in blocks to watch the same sequence. That kept numbers high without crowding the rails. In the quiet, breath slowed and eyes narrowed. The team on the mat checked gloves and spacing with small nods. The next sound would belong to the commander when he chose to start. Staff Sergeant Claire Rivers wore her rank like a quiet anchor. She is an E, 6 inches, the United States Marine Corps, and she carries herself with the calm that comes from long practice. Nothing about her presence tries to fill the room. She came up through Marine Raider training after the 2016 policy changes opened every path. That history matters only because it shaped how she learns under pressure. She treats skill as a responsibility, not a badge. At Triton, she is on orders to a Navy training detachment. Her billet reads Medical Response Instructor with a focus on confined space and flooded environments. The role fits the way she thinks through problems. Her utility uniform sits clean and simple. A rigger's belt holds a minimalist medical rig, staged for fast access and stripped of anything she does not need. Patches stay low-key and practical. The first thing people notice is not size or speed. It is how she breathes on purpose and centers her weight before she moves. Small choices add up to control. There is a partially declassified case in her record that people whisper about. She stabilized a diver inside a tight compartment while equipment failed and time was thin. What matters here is the method, not the medals. She believes in leverage over muscle and structure over strain. Micro adjustments at the hips or shoulder blades do the heavy lifting when space is limited. She keeps the effort small so the result stays large. In a training space, she uses formal address even when others do not. Staff Sergeant Rivers is the way people say her name on the mat and in the brief. It keeps the tone professional and the roles clear. She checks safety first, then students, then herself. The lesson plan is built around simple steps that hold up when air is thin and light is poor. She treats every rep like it might be the one that counts. She did not step onto the mat at Triton to show off. She came to teach survival skills that work when the room closes in and the water rises. The rest of the story will take care of itself. PO 2. Ryan Cole stood on the near edge of the vinyl with his hands loose at his sides. He is an E5 with SEAL Team 2. Waterborne breach cadre, built like a short wall. His reputation in hand-to-hand rotations comes from pressure and grit. PO1, Ethan Sloan waited a step back and to the right. He is an E6 from the same team, lean and precise, known for calm hips and clean grappling lines. He lets the room come to him before he moves. Both came in as volunteer role players for a controlled speed demonstration. Their job was to apply contact control without crossing into competitive force. It sounds simple until pride shows up. Cole reads his power. He checks his gloves twice, rolls his wrists, and tests shoulder range against an invisible stop. The warm-up looks like a promise that he will not be moved. Sloan reads his timing. He sets stance with the outside edge of his foot and relaxes his fingers until the knuckles go quiet. His eyes drift to the first row and back to the mat like a metronome. They know a Marine is the instructor on this block. Some part of them wants to see how far the rules bend when the clock runs and a crowd watches. Training makes room for that thought. Discipline should keep it in its lane. Cole intends to own the upper body. He prefers pressure across the collar line and weight through the ribs where space is thin. He trusts that steady force breaks posture. Sloan prefers lower limb control. He favors ankle captures and knee pins that cut off rotation without strikes. He trusts that a trapped hip tells the rest of the story. On paper, the roles are clean. In the air, you can feel something sharper. Both men carry real skill, and both carry the urge to test the edge of the brief. The structure is correct. SEAL teams are numbered, and formal address holds as PO2 Cole and PO1 Sloan. The seat of conflict is also correct, because turning an evaluation into a pride test often ends the same way. The rules were simple and strict. This block was the Restricted Space Survival Readiness Evaluation. It ran as a controlled speed demonstration with no competitive force and no impact trauma. Everyone understood why that mattered. Confined space and flooded compartments punish speed and ego. The standard rewards clean control and safe release. Command sat with one voice. Commander Andrew Pike held begin, stop, and freeze. His call set the rhythm and ended the action. Roles on the mat were assigned and briefed. PO2 Ryan Cole would control shoulders and upper body. PO1 Ethan Sloan would control legs and hips in line with training. Staff Sergeant Claire Rivers set her start position. She lay supine back down for an entanglement scenario inside a tight compartment. Forearms placed safe along the mat and chin tucked to protect the airway. The mat stayed clean by design. No weapons and no plate carriers crossed the boundary. Only gloves and cleared gear were allowed. Medical coverage stood ready. Hospital corpsmen waited at the edge with a litter and a trauma kit. A clear lane marked the fastest route off the vinyl. A safety officer watched position and distance. He tracked pressure, angle, and pacing. He could signal halt the moment risk climbed. The crowd felt ordered and close. Navy SEALs formed a shallow arc that left space for movement. Trainees held the second line and kept the aisle clear. Early signs of drift showed up in small ways. Knuckles went white at the wrap. A knee settled deeper on the outer thigh than the brief allowed. Weight shifted forward in tiny bites. Eyes held a longer stare than a demo needs. The first row went quieter than normal for a weekday block. None of it crossed the line yet. It looked like tension hunting for a home. The safety officer lifted his chin and kept counting breaths. Commander Pike watched hands and hips. He set his shoulders and drew in a slow breath. The next word would start the clock. The difference between contact control and competitive force is a thin one. It is the difference between a lesson and a mishap. One step either way can change the purpose of the day. Commander Andrew Pike lifted his hand and gave the start call. Begin. Controlled speed. The room settled into the rhythm of an evaluation. PO2 Ryan Cole moved first with upper body pressure. His forearm pressed across the collar line with weight that belonged to a fight, not a demo. The angle bit into bone instead of guiding posture. PO1 Ethan Sloan locked the ankles with a tight wrap. His knee settled on the outer thigh to pin the hip and cut rotation. The hold looked clean until the load increased past contact control. Both men kept the faces of compliance. Hands stayed where a camera would expect them. Force crept higher than the brief allowed. Staff Sergeant Claire Rivers felt the change and marked it. Terminate exercise. Real-world response. The words were clear and built for safety. She added the state call so the whole ring understood the shift. You are no longer inside demonstration protocol. The sentence carried across the vinyl like a flag. The mat stayed clean of equipment by design. No weapons, no plate carriers, only gloves and checked gear. Hospital corpsmen stood at the edge with a litter and a trauma kit. A safety officer tracked distance and posture. He watched knees, elbows, and head position for early signs of risk. His eyes did not leave the knot of movement. Commander Pike drew in a breath and readied the stop. Freeze would have cleared the space in a heartbeat. He was half a beat late because the threat had already reached the instructor. Cole kept weight across clavicle and ribs. Sloan squeezed the ankles until the tendon line stood out. Both holds now lived outside the demo lane. The ring of Navy SEALs went still as if pulled by one wire. The quiet made the pressure sound louder than it was. Air felt thin around the mat. The line had been crossed. Contact control had turned into competitive force with the crowd watching. The purpose of the day had changed in a single beat. Nothing else moved yet. The evaluation was over and survival response had begun. What followed would be measured and fast. Staff Sergeant Claire Rivers shifted her focus from training to survival the way a switch flips. Breath in through the nose, breath out through the teeth. The world narrowed to hands, hips, and angles. She let her body soften on purpose. The slight give invited PO2 Ryan Cole to pour weight across her collar line. His center of mass slid forward a few inches. That was the opening. Her left elbow slid under his armpit and found the hollow where leverage lives. Fingers index just above the joint where soft tissue meets the hard line of bone. She set the frame without hurry. Hips rotated a quarter turn while shoulders anchored to the mat. Spine torque traveled like a quiet coil unwinding. There were no strikes. Only structure. The spiral lock redirected his pressure into a path his arm could not follow. Cole's elbow began to open past comfort. The sound was small and real, more a shift in the joint capsule than anything dramatic. His head dropped as balance left him. Rivers kept the arc smooth. She felt for the limit and held it, then eased as the lock took his posture. Control mattered more than spectacle. Commander Andrew Pike stood ready to call freeze. Hospital Corpsmen waited at the edge with a litter and a trauma kit. The mat stayed clean of gear, only gloves and checked equipment allowed. Cole's chest met the vinyl as his shoulder line unraveled. His legs kicked once as reflex met physics. The rest of him went flat and still. Rivers moved with him rather than against him. Knees repositioned, forearm guided his wrist to the mat, and the lock turned into a bracket. She kept pressure low and steady. Air felt thin and precise around the center of the ring. The crowd's silence made every small movement easy to hear. Even the scrape of fabric on vinyl carried. She checked his breathing and elbow alignment by feel. The lock eased another fraction, so circulation stayed clear. Her head stayed up and eyes tracked the safety officer. No victory pose, no shout. Only a measured release the second Cole stopped resisting. She addressed the space, not the crowd. PO2 Ryan Cole was now out of the fight without a strike thrown. His frame was controlled and safe for medical hands. Staff Sergeant Rivers shifted her weight back and prepared for whatever came next. PO1 Ethan Sloan still had the ankle capture after the first lock. Staff Sergeant Claire Rivers let her hips drift off axis to change the pull line. The shift felt small and looked deliberate. She exhaled and let the trapped leg go loose for half a beat. That softness drew Sloan into a stronger drag. His hands tightened and his elbows chased the motion. Rivers set the trap. Her left knee slid. Then her left foot threaded behind Sloan's forearm. The heel found the narrow space between the ulna and the flexor mass. She did not kick. She placed and levered. The point of the heel worked like a pry bar against tissue that does not want to be stretched. Her torso rotated with the pull rather than against it. Hips turned, ribs followed, and the ankle line reversed from trapped to free. The hand on her boot lost purchase as the lever bit. There was a real sound, quiet and damp. It felt like a shift in the joint capsule and the soft glide of tissue under pressure. No loud snap, no theatrics. Sloan's arm lost stability at the elbow and wrist. The wrap fell open and his weight rocked backward. The ankle line cleared in a clean path. Rivers stayed inside control. She posted with her right hand for balance and eased the heel off the forearm. Her left hand slid to stabilize the wrist while her forearm supported the elbow. She kept the pressure at a safe threshold. One palm settled lightly on the back of Sloan's neck to stop the reflex to surge forward. Her voice stayed low, and even as she gave the standard stop resisting cue and told him the arm was not stable, the mat stayed clean of equipment. No weapons and no plate carriers had been allowed near the vinyl. Commander Andrew Pike was ready to call freeze if movement surged again. Hospital Corpsmen stood at the edge with a litter and a trauma kit. The safety officer watched distance and body angles without blinking. The lane for medical access stayed open. Sloan tried one more balance check and then let the arm rest inside the support. Rivers loosened contact, the instant control was clear. Breath stayed even and her posture stayed neutral. She backed his shoulders into a safer line so blood flow remained good at the wrist. Then she shifted one knee and created space for the medics without breaking eye contact. It looked calm because it was planned. What began as an ankle capture ended as a temporary stabilization. The hold was broken without a strike and without extra damage. The professionalism in the center of the ring said enough. Commander Andrew Pike raised his hand and called freeze. The word settled over the mat like a lid. Movement stopped clean and fast. Hospital corpsmen stepped in on the marked lane with a litter and a trauma kit. Gloves were already on. Their voices stayed low and calm. One corpsman knelt by PO2 Ryan Cole and began a rapid neurovascular check. He asked for light touch and checked motor at the fingers. He watched color return with a quick capillary refill. A distal pulse came next at the wrist. Skin, temperature, and sensation matched the picture. The corpsman applied a temporary elbow splint with padding at bony points. Another corpsman moved to PO1 Ethan Sloan. He placed a soft sling and supported the elbow to protect the joint. Wrist position was set neutral to keep tendons quiet. Range of motion was tested only to a safe limit. He checked for pain with small movements and then stopped. Short cues kept Sloan steady and focused. The mat stayed clear of gear. No weapons and no plate carriers were allowed in this space. The safety officer watched distance and posture and kept the lane open. Around the arc, the Navy SEALs held silence. Boots lined the boundary and no one leaned in. The quiet made it easier for the medics to work. Staff Sergeant Claire Rivers took 3 measured steps back and stood at ease. She kept her eyes on the scene and gave a brief report that medical response was required for both. Her hands stayed still at her sides. Commander Pike acknowledged and let the corpsmen finish their checks. The litter team prepared for a clean move if needed. The safety officer confirmed that the route stayed clear. Rivers kept her breathing even and her posture neutral. No celebration and no display. Only attention to safety and the next step in the process. The wind carried salt across the vinyl, and the noise of the seawall faded in and out. Order returned to the center of the ring. The room felt steady and ready for the formal debrief that would follow. The debrief took place in a quiet conference room with soft light on metal chairs and a clean table. 3 cameras recorded the session, 1 body camera feed and 2 wide angles. The room felt steady and official. Lieutenant Commander Julia Park sat at the center as the Naval Legal Officer. Master Chief Special Warfare Operator Mark Dwyer represented the SEAL Training Command. Safety Oversight Director Greg Fulton joined from the civilian side. They confirmed recording and identified all present. Staff Sergeant Claire Rivers sat upright with hands resting on the table. The tone was calm and procedural. Lieutenant Commander Park opened with scope and sequence. She asked for the moment the evolution departed protocol. Rivers answered with a precise description of pressure and placement. The panel reviewed the first marker. PO2 Ryan Cole applied a forearm across the clavicle with force that exceeded contact control. Angle and load targeted bone instead of posture guidance. They moved to the second marker. PO1 Ethan Sloan used a competitive restraint at the ankles and set a knee on the outer thigh to pin the hip. Load increased beyond the brief for a controlled speed demonstration. Rivers described her response in clear steps. She issued the required warning with the words, "Terminate exercise" and "real-world response." She followed with a statement so the entire ring understood the exercise had shifted into live response conditions. The panel synchronized all 3 camera feeds to the same second. They watched hands, hips, and timing against the audio. They compared notes with written witness statements gathered on scene. Findings aligned across sources. Staff Sergeant Rivers redirected force and did not strike. Her actions remained proportional and ended the threat with controlled technique. Lieutenant Commander Park summarized the administrative outcome. No use of force violation was recorded for Staff Sergeant Rivers. Boundary violations were logged for PO2 Cole and PO1 Sloan. Master Chief Dwyer recommended practical measures. Both sailors would be placed on limited duty and referred to orthopedics. A line of duty or safety mishap report would be opened. Director Fulton added process steps for training status. Both would be removed from training pending command review. The case would proceed to a medical evaluation board in the coming weeks. The room exhaled in a small way when the conclusion settled. The panel noted that clear rules and fast reporting had protected the training environment. The session ended with the sense that discipline had done its job. The first 48 hours looked like a checklist, written in clear ink. Action logs marked limited duty for PO2 Ryan Cole and PO1 Ethan Sloan. Both were removed from training pending command review and scheduled for orthopedics. A line of duty report opened for each sailor. A safety mishap report mirrored the same facts for the training command. Notes recorded that the mat remained clear and that medical response met the standard. Notifications moved across the detachment with steady speed. Supervisors acknowledged receipt and confirmed duty limitations. The range schedule adjusted without noise or delay. The next steps reached beyond the week. Medical evaluation board packets began with imaging orders and consults. Administrative review placed both cases on the agenda for the coming cycle. No one rushed the process. The language stayed professional and plain. The goal was to heal what could heal and to decide fit for duty when facts were complete. Across the hall, a laminated roster hung by the gear lockers. A small update appeared without ceremony. Staff Sergeant Claire Rivers was listed as lead instructor for confined space survival at the Triton Training Detachment, effective upon command approval. Late light turned the catwalks gold as people cleared the pit. Captain Elias Ward walked past the entry and paused just long enough to leave a short remark about action taken for safety, not anger. His tone landed like a hand on a shoulder, and then he moved on. 3 young Navy SEALs stepped aside at the roster board. They did not speak. The path opened on its own, and the moment carried more weight than applause. Staff Sergeant Rivers checked the board, and then the time on a wall clock set to 2:30 p.m. She continued to the kit room with the same even walk she had used on the mat. Breathing stayed steady, and her focus stayed on students and safety. The day closed with quiet routine. Paperwork found its folders, and the range went dark, one bay at a time. If this story feels like the kind of discipline the world needs, share it with someone who respects quiet strength.